My name is Jeff Silber. I'm a Senior Research Analyst with BMO Capital Markets. One of the areas that I focus on is the education sector. And I'm thrilled to be here to moderate the panel this morning entitled, Can the Traditional University Thrive in the Internet Age? Obviously, we'll talk a lot about what's going on with traditional universities and technology. My guess is we'll open it up a little bit more beyond that. Even since we picked this topic to talk about, there's been a lot happening. I'm sure you all saw last week's announcement with Purdue University and Cappelli University getting together. I'm sure somebody will bring that up. If not, I will. But there is a lot happening in the space today, and we've got a phenomenal panel to talk about that. I'm going to introduce them briefly. I've got a number of questions that I'll start off with, and I wanted to make sure that we had some time for Q&A from the audience. We'll open it up with about 15 minutes left, roughly, at the end of the session. On my far right, I guess your far left, nothing to do with their political end of the spectrum, is Bill Achtmeyer. Bill is the founder and senior managing partner of Parthenon-EY, one of the premier consulting firms in the world with a very, very burgeoning and strong education practice. Next to me on my right is Bill Bennett, the former U.S. Secretary of Education, chairman of the Conservative Leaders for Education, a number of other things. I'm sure you've seen Bill present at this conference beforehand, and be phenomenal to hear from him as well. On my left is Greg Cappelli. Greg is the CEO of the Apollo Education Group, runs the University of Phoenix, also the chairman of Apollo Global, their international arm. Next to Greg is Ron Daniels. Ron is the president of Johns Hopkins University, one of the premier educational institutions in the world. And last but certainly not least, on my far left is Nikhil Sinha. Nikhil is the chief business officer for Coursera, one of the more innovative companies out there within the education sector. So as I said, I'm going to start off with some questions. I'm going to try to make sure that all the panelists participate if they want. And then again, we'll open it up to Q&A from the audience with about 15 minutes left. So since the topic is technology, given the available technology that's out there today and the comfort with the current generation of students have with this technology, should we just abolish the notion of a traditional higher education? How can traditional education institutions stay relevant in this environment? And we'll start with Bill at the end, and then we'll go down the panel.
Well, thanks. I think we have a couple slides here that I would like to put up. The first is it's here to stay. It's ubiquitous. Technology has been embraced not only by, obviously, the students that are coming into the schools, but as you know, there are all sorts of different course offerings. And if you look at the growth, just in enrollment, that has taken place. There's been 24% growth since 2003. All of that has come from online or hybrid kinds of offerings. And the next slide will show you the number of courses that are being offered. And as you can see, whether it's at the undergraduate level or at the master's level, there's a plethora of courses that are being offered. And then finally, the issue is really, in our opinion, not whether it's going to change the world. The question is, how do you address the world? And there are different types of customer segments. As a consultant, you obviously have to do all this sort of naming of various things. But you can see that on the left-hand side, those that are probably more relevant to this audience, those that go to college at the 18 to 19-year-old level, coming of age, and career starters, they're the younger ones. They're the ones that enjoy the on-campus experience. And then there's another group, which is pretty significant when you look at it, sort of 50-50, that are on the career track. And are older and going back to school and taking advantage of either for-profit universities or community colleges. And in many respects, they probably are the group that is responsible for some of the debt that's not being paid back. And so the issue is, how do you address those segments as opposed to whether or not this digital phenomena is going to upend. the university. And the last thing I would say is, textbooks, probably back in time, were thought of as being a bit of a disruptor because they obviously sort of captured what was happening in that discipline, and professors may have been less relevant. I don't know a professor who feels that he or she is less relevant. And so I think that technology's here. It's going to disrupt to a certain extent, but depending on which end of this spectrum you're on, there may be hope for a liberal arts education, but also there's also a great deal of hope for those people that have not been blessed with a great education at an early age, and they can do that at an older age.
Okay, that's great. I think that the data really helps set the framework for the discussion. Mr. Secretary, maybe you can give us a little bit more about how traditional universities can thrive in this age.
Well, let me go back to where you started. I like that idea of should we abolish. That's kind of bold, tempting, too.
Glad I asked it.
Yeah.
Resist the temptation.
No, well, not rhetorically.
Right.
When I became Secretary of Education, I was given lots of medals and gowns and hats and things. Wasn't given a sword, but if I hadn't, was told you can abolish here, I might have. I said, let's abolish ignorance. Wave of the sword didn't do it. So as I told the group yesterday, they said, take something more realistic. I said, let's go to middle school and abolish puberty. That will help toward abolishing ignorance, or at least helping the knowledge. That's even harder, actually. Do ignorance and puberty run together? Why isn't there a panel on that at the Milken Conference? Anyway, no, I don't think you can abolish it, but I do think a lot of it will die of its own. In the same way that a lot of the phrase you used, the liberal arts died of its own, or died by second-degree murder by the faculty. My fields, philosophy and English and humanities, have been killed in many colleges and universities. Professors express regret at the business orientation of their students. Well, you killed the humanities. It's no shock that they're pursuing other things. So some of these things will go by the wayside. But the internet does have its place to play, and it's a place to playing it increasingly. I should say, in full disclosure, I'm a special advisor to highered.com, which seeks to get more institutions to offer more online courses to more of its students. And there have been some remarkable successes in this area. It's amazing what Liberty University has done, for example, and some others. So I think it'll continue to grow. The question is resistance and creativity. Some institutions have responded, I think, very creatively, positively to this. Others have resisted. I remember talking to my friend, your friend too, Sebastian Thrun at Udacity. I helped as an advisor there. He said, the faculty will love this. I said, I don't know. And then he called me up and he said, the faculty doesn't love this. They think they're being replaced, Anyway, some people do, some people didn't. Just to get to the end of our story, there could be a combination, Jeff, where you have the technology and the student, and the university just fades in the background. Thrun's pursuing something like that now with the nano degree. And certifying institutions may not be universities, they may be art museums or newspapers or IBM. And the nano degree that Thrun offers, you take the course, you pay the money. If you don't get a job within 12 weeks, you get your money back. I'm waiting for that university with the money back offer, which is after you come here and engage and enjoy the pleasures of the intellectual life and learn all about other people and other cultures. And if you don't, you'll get your money back. You remember the student who sued Columbia University based on the catalog, Learning, Virtue, and Piety. He said, some learning, virtue rarely came up, piety never. But Thrun makes a promise. Look, it's broadened, and it's broadened the experience of students. It's made it possible for a lot of students to participate who hadn't been participating before. And I think in the future, there will be fewer institutions that look like and operate like traditional universities than there are now. A lot fewer. Also, the students kind of like it this way. You know, the experience, I talked to a couple of other professors at Stanford who told me not only did their courses increase dramatically with online registration, but their Stanford students started taking the course online. What the heck? My two sons went to Princeton. I didn't go, I couldn't get in. But they went to Princeton. They told me the students were sitting in their dorms watching the lectures online. You couldn't even get out of bed at Princeton, for God's sakes. They need Admiral McCraven to give them that lecture. Get out of bed, make your bed. Because they're so used to this kind of way of operating. So I think that tells us something too. The great universities, the prestige universities will survive, like the Roaches at the end of the world. The prestige institutions will survive because that's what people are buying. They're not buying education anyway. They're buying the prestige. That's my view. After visiting, not just going to one or two, but visiting 250 universities and talking about things like this with people in charge. And one thing you said I got to pick up on, that thing was so odd about Purdue.
Right.
That two people called me that day and said, "Did you hear that Kaplan bought Purdue?" I said, "No, I hadn't." Anyway, that's how odd it was. It was I feel at it backwards.
I'm sure we'll delve into it a little bit further. Greg, your firm really pioneered online education. How has that affected traditional universities? What can they do about that?
First of all, you expect me to follow the secretary here?
Come on.
Yeah, look, I just to your original point, I don't think that it's going away. I think we all have an obligation, those of us that run schools and our educators, to modernize the delivery, continue to modernize it, right? We did that many years ago with some of the first online programs. But we talked about this a little bit, Jeff, before that, you know, I'm going to take sort of our great prestigious universities out of the mix because that is an incredible, wonderful experience and privilege for very few people to enjoy. But when you look at it overall, and nobody's got better data than Bill over there, but when you aggregate the data, I think what you find is that college and university is generally, you can liken it to golf. It's expensive in general, it's hard, and it takes a long time, right? So that's something that we can relate to. And so it's interesting when you look at data that shows, even today, the Bureau of Labor Statistics data, you look at it, you're probably going to double your lifetime's earnings if you get a full degree, and you're going to do even better if you're in STEM. And yet all you hear are complaints about colleges and universities, right, about what I just said. So I honestly think the role of technology is going to continue to play a very important role. You can go to school for free. You can get all the content you want in the world for free. There's expensive schools, there's schools in between, there's schools for the masses that are online. But one thing is still true. You don't find a lot of people that tell you that they had a tremendously engaging, fun, exciting experience when they're studying in college, at the college level. And I'm very passionate about wanting to see that happen over the next sort of 5-10 years, because we know for sure that many, many, many of the jobs today that are supporting our economy are going to be gone 10 to 15 years. All you have to do is sit down with the Googles of the world, and they'll help you realize that there's 5 million people driving things in this country today. How many do you think will be driving them for a living 10 years from now? Right? It's going to change. So, you know, is college too long? Maybe. Is it too hard? Maybe. Is it too expensive? For sure. Are there solutions that are on the way that are trying to address all those things? Yes. Everybody wants them here sooner. And I think the technology, whether it's through virtual reality or VA or different forms, if you engage a person in learning and they get excited about it, much like you see kids with video games, I'm not saying gaming is the answer to everything, perhaps we're going to be able to get people to engage more, be better at matching up what their skill sets are to the jobs, because students are frustrated when they get out of school and employers are frustrated because they're not matched up very well when you look at the whole. So I don't think that the system is blowing up overnight, but I agree with the secretary that it's changing, and if you don't change with it, you're not going to exist.
Ron, you're our representative of traditional education. What are your views?
Well, it's nice when the questions start off to Bill on the extreme right, and the question was there staying power? And you said yes to technology, but I wasn't so clear about the traditional university.
Yeah.
And I guess somewhat reassured, even if the parallel to roaches isn't entirely congenial, but seeing that there's some survival value in our institutions. And I think it's important when we have this debate to be clear about what we're talking about. First and foremost, will the traditional university survive? I guess the traditional university is defined how? Research-intensive universities, like the model of the Johns Hopkins. Is there survival value there in the world that we're in the world that we think we're heading into? I think absolutely. The research-intensive university, even when we talk about all the technologies that are apparently going to disrupt us, destroy us, and so forth, it's important to remember many of those ideas actually emanated from the research-intensive university. So there's a number of different roles that we play, from education, research, to playing a role in industrial policy formation and execution and so forth. And it seems to me that at least a subset of institutions that look like us will have survival value. Will they change dramatically in terms of the role the technology plays, how we deliver our program? Absolutely. But the idea that you still have a constellation of students, of faculty, and the kinds of experiences that lie at the core of the great research-intensive universities, I think that will persist. Does that mean we're the only game in town? We're not the only game in town now, and we clearly won't be in the future. There's going to be tremendous need for skills development in the way that the other panelists have discussed. And there's a lot of ways in which those skills can be imparted. And again, would expect that we'll see even greater differentiation and heterogeneity within the sector of tertiary education. But at the core, my instinct is there's still survival value for us. And let me just say that so much of this debate has been very much framed in terms of the way in which, and the Purdue example is interesting, but it masks, or at least it exemplifies a broader trend where you actually are seeing the not-for-profits, mainly the publics, but also the privates, entering in a very significant way into the online sphere. But it seems to me that a lot of that work has been extension of student bodies, extension of program, and that's an important sphere for us to be talking about. But equally, I really do believe the way in which we, in terms of the traditional campus experience, provide that program, that is going to change quite dramatically, and technology will be a big part of that.
Okay, great. Nikhil, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, as you can imagine, I'm a great proponent of the fact that the traditional university will not only survive, but will actually thrive in an online environment. And we see the evidence of that today. Coursera, for instance, partners with 150 of the very traditional universities, the kind that Ron's talking about. In fact, Johns Hopkins is one of our anchor partners. But we have 150 of these universities on our platform. And they're thriving in this world of technology, both by what they're doing internally on their campus with technology, but also what they're doing with companies like Coursera. Coursera today has 25 million registered learners around the world that are students of these traditional universities. We provide the platform and the access that allows these learners all over the world to go to Johns Hopkins or go to Yale or Columbia or Princeton or UC San Diego or the University of Illinois, and be able to get access to the kind of education that was typically restricted to people who came within that context. In comparison, that 25 million registered, just in comparison, the total enrollment in higher education, in traditional higher education in the US today is 20 million. So Coursera just by itself now has number of registered learners that are larger than total enrollment in the US, and we've sort of extended the reach of these universities all over the world. Over 100 million people have enrolled in the 100 million enrollments have taken place over the 5 years. We're not talking about a 5-year period, but over 100 million people have enrolled in these courses offered by our university partners. So they're not just going to survive, they're in fact going to thrive, I think, in this way. And I think three main areas that I'd like to touch upon in how universities will thrive and extend themselves. One, I think the traditional university will extend itself in time and space in ways that it's not been able to do before. It will do so in time because the notion of a 4-year fixed undergraduate degree program or a 2-year master's program will increasingly become more flexible as we start to put these programs online and people begin to take these courses based on their own circumstances and the own pace at which we offer. So you will have the traditional time-bound programs offered on campus, but we'll begin to see more flexibility as these programs go online and are available around the world. And that's the second part. They'll extend themselves in space. Today, you don't have to come to Baltimore anymore to take a Johns Hopkins course. You can be in Rwanda, or you can be in India, you can be in China, you can be in Colombia. These courses now available in every country in the world. Coursera has learners that are in every country in the world. And they're beginning to extend, again, the university out in space. So the extension of the traditional university in time and space is something that I think is an important transformation that's taking place within the traditional university environment. The second point I want to make is on the impact of the university. And the universities, the traditional universities, have always had a tremendous impact in two different ways. One, they've advanced the frontiers of learning, disciplinary and disciplinary, by engaging in research and by engaging in faculty who are thinking about how do we extend the boundaries of knowledge. And secondly, by educating the leaders of the world in small numbers on their campus. Right? That's the way they've always had their impact. I think the impact that they're now going to have through the availability of technology is to train people much broader, in much broader geographies and different socioeconomic conditions than they've ever been able to do before. And we see evidence of that already. Our students on Coursera who take courses in the open MOOC environment or the open course environment tend to be older. They tend to be lifelong learners. They're looking for transformations of their careers. They tend to be from, in fact, lower socioeconomic status than the traditional learners who come to the on-campus environment. So again, reaching out and transforming different kinds of lives than the universities have transformed before. And again, through the degree programs that we are now launching on the program, reaching learners who never had opportunity to take degrees. Evidence suggests on our platform that on average, a student taking a degree program on Coursera is 5 to 7 years older than they are in their traditional environment. And I think, Greg, you see the same trends in Apollo, where the people that do come to that are probably much older. So we're seeing a different demographic come to these universities and be educated through the technology platforms. And finally, I think what we'll see more in the teaching environment within these universities is the application of data and technology to transform how education is delivered. Until now, if you go to Johns Hopkins or you go to Columbia, you go to one of our university partners, you're a student, you go into a classroom, faculty member delivers the lecture. It's the same lecture delivered to all the students within that classroom. I think with the application of adaptive learning and the ways that we are beginning to analyze data, we'll see two different trends. One is the personalization of content. People will come onto our platform, we'll assess their aspirations, we'll diagnose their current capability, and we'll give them the exact content that they need to meet their requirements, because we can now process that much data to understand what they need. And secondly, the personalization of teaching. And not only will we give them the right content, but we'll give them the right content as delivered by the right kind of faculty on our program. So I think we'll take, again, that traditional classroom environment and we'll extend it in ways that it hasn't been done before, both in terms of the teaching and the content of traditional learning. So I look at what's happening to the traditional university is really being extended dramatically around the world through the use of technology platforms.
Okay, great. We can move on to the next topic. Given what we've said here, does it make sense to encourage our children to still pursue the American dream of a college degree? Would it be better for us as a society to maybe promote alternatives to a degree, certificates, apprenticeships, etc.? If the latter, how can traditional higher education institutions take a more active role in these alternatives? And we'll start with the secretary and then move down. If I could ask the panelists maybe to keep the remarks a little bit briefer so we can get on some of the more topics. Thanks.
Well, it all depends. I wrote a book called Is College Worth It? And if you go to the last page, the answer is it all depends. Who's asking? What do they want to do? What do they know? And where are they going? Quick answer. If you get into Stanford, go. For any number of reasons, you're going to be better off. This is from the guy who advised Bill Gates's proctor at Harvard to tell, quote, the little dope to stay at Harvard, because he'd be a lot better off with a Harvard degree than going off to Seattle somewhere. So bear that advice in mind. True story. Anyway, we've since gotten back together, but sort of. There are a lot of alternatives. There are a lot of alternatives. So I mean, I think it's an empirical question when you get to 16 or 17, and who are you talking to? I just asked Bill, and I'm going to throw another question on top of that.
Go right ahead.
What about community colleges, not traditional universities? What about for-profit places? And add to that the fact that one of the reasons I say in the book that for a lot of people it's not the right choice is people starting a 4-year traditional university, 48% don't finish, and often don't finish with a lot of debt. So that's, I think, a fair question too. But who's the kid, and what's that child got in mind? How strong is the desire? What are the answers to the questions that would be asked by a parent who knew the right questions to ask? What do you want to do? How strong do you feel about it? Are you going to really go to work? Are you just doing this because everybody else does? What do you have in mind doing when you grow up?
Greg, I know your firm has done a lot with these alternatives. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up the American dream, and I think the reason it's been linked to education is because that, in many cases, leads to something you love to do, a career, right? So you can support your family and your life. So maybe that question is going to turn into, instead of should we encourage our kids to go to college, is what the secretary said, which is what do you want to do in your life and what's going to make you happy, right? And when you figure that out, then we've gone from one alternative, which let's shove you down a path of you're going to go to school for 4 years and in some cases root on a football team and enjoy your life on campus, to everybody should know this number in this room, and I think this is a rough number, but in our labor force, there's close to 140 million people over the age of 25. I'm not getting into participation rates and all that, but 85 million of them really don't have a bachelor's degree, right? So you look at what Mitch Daniels is doing, or everybody else. I mean, the question you ask is, do we encourage people to pursue their dream? And if that's an education, now there are many more avenues to pursue it, whether it's through a Coursera type offering, or I agree with Bill. You can go if you get into Stanford, go. But now it's what I see emerging in our schools in different countries, whether it's Germany or the UK or some other areas of the world, is it is more linked early on in a kid's life to helping them identify what they want to do. Then it gets tied into an apprenticeship, right? And you're right. I mean, we are doing things now. Like 10 years ago, I never knew we'd be doing 3-month, coding boot camps where these kids are studying together 6 days a week for 3 months. When they come out, they might be making $60,000 or $80,000 a year. Fine, that's their dream. That's what they want to do. I'd encourage them all day long to do it. So I think to answer your question, it's figuring out what you want to do. And fortunately, there are more avenues and more ways to do it. And let's face it, a lot of traditional colleges are stacking certificates, right, and programs where you can get credentialed in areas. We're doing it, and I know many others are doing it. So even if you don't complete a 4-year program, maybe after 2, you're going to be qualified to do something that you might want to do or you might love.
Ron?
So, I think there's little doubt, again, it goes back to the heterogeneity point that I made earlier, that there's a lot of work to be done in terms of expanding the sphere of educational opportunities outside of the traditional four-year college. And, to my mind, I think one of the great challenges that confronts the system of American higher education today, and it's not trying to deflect responsibility for things that we have to worry about at research-intensive universities, but it is the abysmal completion rates in community colleges. I mean, this is a sphere that is absolutely indispensable for solving a number of the skills shortages that we see in this country, and yet as a sector, we accept completion rates and proficiency levels that are wildly different from what we expect of traditional four-year colleges. And there's even work to be done there across the spectrum of not-for-profits, let alone for-profits. But I think that's a really important issue that we really have not got our arms wrapped around in this country. So having said that, I think there is an important role for those institutions. What can the traditional, again, research-intensive university do to play a productive role in increasing avenues to those opportunities? I mean, figure out novel ways of collaborating. One way, which has been very powerful, particularly in the California system, has of course been the plethora of articulation agreements that exist between community colleges and universities like UCLA and Berkeley, where students will go for an associate's degree in a community college and then find their ways to a four-year college after 2 years. It's a very powerful mechanism, particularly in terms of creating equal opportunity for students from low socioeconomic backgrounds. And there is no mechanism, it turns out, that is as powerful as those arrangements in terms of building the pipelines to elite universities. So that's one thing that is being done and could do more of. Hopkins just recently entered into a very interesting and novel arrangement supported by the Mellon Foundation with the Baltimore Community College, where we're actually going to take students out of 2-year programs who are focused on the humanities and bring them into Hopkins. So again, just we know this from the work of Rod Chetty and others, the lack of true socioeconomic diversity in elite universities continues to be a major problem for us. This is one very powerful way we can deal with that. I think another way, though, in which universities can play a role on broadening opportunity comes from interesting arrangements that they can enter into with K-12 schools within their community, and again, interesting partnerships with community colleges. So here again, something that we feel really good about at Hopkins is picking up on the P-TECH model that IBM pioneered, where, of course, as you know, the IBM P-TECH model, and it's been now picked up by a number of other leading American corporations, but the idea is that students in so-called dropout factories, failing public schools, are basically paired with a corporate sponsor who will work with a community college and say that if the students complete high school, make grade, and do 2 years of post-secondary education, typically in a community college, getting an associate's degree, those students will go to the top of the list for hiring for entry-level jobs with requirement skills credentials at the corporate sponsors. We're doing, on that model, we've started an arrangement with the Baltimore City Community College and basically committing to hiring students who come out of this program for entry-level jobs across our health system, and several other health employers in the city are working with us. So again, I think this is a way in which we can leverage our hiring capability and other collaborations we have within the city to break the back of this issue.
Great. Nikhil?
I think the micro-credentials are here, and they're here to stay. I think whether it's the nano degree from Udacity or the micromasters from edX or some of the specializations on Coursera, the badging that we now see on places like LinkedIn begin to show clear evidence that employers are looking for alternative credentials as a basis for employment. The Microsoft and Coursera completion badges are now the 1 and 2 most posted badges on LinkedIn, and employers are beginning to reach out to those students and say, you have a skill set, you've got a competency that we want, we will interview you. So we are seeing some evidence that I think it's here. I think the bigger problem that Ron points out is what happens at the college level, at the 4-year undergraduate level. I don't think we're at a point yet where the micro-credentials are going to overthrow the importance of an undergraduate degree. I therefore still think we need to find innovative ways to make people coming through community colleges successful in completing degree programs. Some combination of on-premise and technology is essential. Some of our university partners are beginning to play more of that role through their what used to be called their extension programs or continuing education schools, which were essentially designed for people in the community to continue to enrich themselves, but are increasingly beginning to award credits and beginning to provide credentials that people who have not matriculated into the traditional campus can then use and stack and put towards a degree program and progress towards that over time. So I think we'll see some of that happening as well.
Great. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just to jump in on that, I think, again, this idea of credentialing is something that, even in the context of the 4-year university, we're moving on in very interesting ways. So, for instance, if you think about students who are doing everything from traditional liberal arts programs to engineering programs, we're seeing, and we've encouraged this, a clear trend towards the kids doing a minor in entrepreneurship and business management. So again, that's a way in which you are starting to do these micro-credentials that again show some adaptability by the institution to understand the workforce environment in which they'll graduate into.
Bill, we'll end with you on this topic.
So I'm the data guy.
Yeah.
So the data says that if you go to college, you make $1 million more over your lifetime than if you didn't go to college. If you finish, right. If you look at unemployment, it's twice as much for those that didn't go to college than did. So 2.7% unemployment for those that have a degree, and greater than 5% if you didn't. And if you want to get incarcerated, you don't get a degree. So, do you want to get a college education? The answer is absolutely yes. Our work found that the for-profit universities, which were basically put under a microscope that was ridiculous in the Obama administration, does better in serving minorities than certainly community colleges. Frankly, my opinion is we ought to get rid of community colleges. I think they're a waste of time, and they're not what they should be. In this era, what you're going to find is small schools, less than 1,000 students. They're going to go the way of the wind. I'm not worried about the Ivy League. I'm not worried about Johns Hopkins. I'm not worried about NESPAC schools. I'm not worried about a lot of the top schools in the country. They'll be here forever. The smaller schools with very little endowments, they're going to be a memory.
You mentioned getting rid of community colleges. Saw some eyebrows raised in the audience.
There you go.
Would you suggest an alternative?
I think the marketplace. What Greg and University of Phoenix is able to provide, what DeVry is able to provide, are excellent. There are some bad players or bad apples, but that doesn't mean the industry's bad. And I think they do a better job. I think that it is known throughout the education world. The biggest thing that makes a difference is the teacher. You get a good teacher, you get a good professor, you get a good outcome. Community colleges do not attract the best faculty.
Okay, fair enough.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, please.
Data. Do you have a data man? Do you have numbers? Completion rate, community college completion rate for profits?
completion rate is about 2 times higher for-profit than it is for community college.
You think having skin in the game, putting money in, makes a difference?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And what are those numbers like? For higher ed, completing 4 years is 48% or 52%.
Yeah, so so you're talking about 35% completion rate versus 16, 17%.
16 and 17.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. Mentioned we'd have some time for Q&A from the audience, so if there are any questions, we do have a mic runner. Just raise your hand. I think the mic will come up to you. Great. If you don't mind introducing yourself when you ask the question, thank you.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah. Bhagwan Chaudhary. I'm a professor of finance at UCLA, Anderson School. My question to the panelists is the following. We have this dichotomous view that those who study should not work and those who work should not study. How about if we change the model and go with something radical which says Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, everybody will work, starting with high school. And Thursday and Friday, we'll all study. And Friday and Saturday and Sunday, we'll all pray and play. Because the issue here is that, even the workforce, the world changes, and then suddenly we say, hey, we have to retrain people. But if we are constant learners, we won't have that issue. And similarly, we have this issue of those who are not learning things that are practical. But if they work all the time, maybe they would do it.
Please.
I'll take it. I think that's a phenomenal question and point. And I just want to touch on something that when I said, it's incumbent upon us to reinvent sort of the delivery of education going forward, it's to get better results. Whether you're for-profit or not for-profit, we all use some form of either private capital or public capital or taxpayer dollars. And overall, whether it's 50 or 55%, would you put your money into an investment like that if you thought the result was half the time things were going to be okay? And it's why employers complain massively that they don't get the return on the dollars they spend to recruit students, right, in the first place. They don't get a positive ROI because they don't get in the right jobs and stay in the right jobs. The point I want to make is we have some models in different places in the world. Germany is an example. And it blew me away when I got to study it a little bit, because we don't do this here, but we have a program there in a very successful school where it's just natural for them. They actually work 1 week and they go to school the next week. And then they work and they go to school. And they don't think anything about it other than the employers got skin in the game, the students got skin in the game. They're not getting paid a ton more than the tuition because it's expensive to go to college, right? But it's a beautiful thing, and it has great outcomes. And I would love to see that developed in certain other parts of the world, where I think, to your point, it's a different delivery. Some of it's online, some of it's offline. There'll be other technologies involved, but they're doing both. It's not one or the other. And sometimes I think in higher education, we just get caught, and there's a lot of development, a lot of new things happening. It's great. But, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, we still define a credit hour the same way that we did during the agricultural period. So, to your point, we need to reinvent the delivery of it as well. And that's an example of where I'm seeing much better outcomes and results for both students and employers. So just one example, Jeff.
Interesting. Any other thoughts from the panelists? Okay, sorry, we have some more questions. Sorry. Again, can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, James Starr. What is the role over the next 5 to 7 years of accreditation organizations? Do they help or hinder these trends? What happens to their power and their ability to shape education?
Okay.
So they're very powerful, and there's a lot of talk about vocational schools and linking employment, obviously, to education. But the reality is that accreditation is important in the eyes of an employer. Now, there are some companies like BMW and Clemson University where basically BMW has put $1.5 billion into a program to help on this on automotive. So it's directly linked to obviously their desires. The faculty initially was not particularly enamored with this, but $1.5 billion, you know, is actually something people like, and so 95% of those folks that graduate are given a job at BMW. And the same is true with Colorado University and Lockheed Martin. In fact, our firm, EY, is working with Northeastern. And so I think you're going to find, you know, it's interesting, all the public policy debates that I've observed over time, business is actually ahead of the game, not behind the game. As much criticism as business gets in this world, there are more businesses worried about climate change than certainly there are in Washington. So I think you're going to find that businesses say, hey, look, we can't get the talent we want, and so we're going to go figure out how to make this happen.
Right.
And to that point, I talked to, I've had the privilege to be able to sit down with a number of the Fortune 500 CEOs, just talk to them and ask them what some of their issues are. And along the way, when you listen about what they're satisfied or not satisfied with higher education in general, some of them, and I'm starting to believe it, are telling me they're going to be really the next accrediting bodies, right? As they group together and tell the modern, you know, university or college, here's what we are looking for. And if you want us to hire your grads, you better listen to us.
Interesting. Please.
Gary Weisterman, I'm the headmaster of Milken Community Schools. Across the country, particularly in the Midwest and the East, there has been increasing growth in the early college model for K-12 students to begin entry into higher education earlier. There's a number of schools around the country that are grades 9 through 13 where the students are coming out with both their high school degrees and either an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. I'm curious from all the panelists, but Ron, especially from you, whether this is something that you see as something that will show significant growth over the next couple of decades.
So, you know, the P-Tech program that I described a moment ago was precisely framed on that model, which is that the students are leaving with a high school diploma, high school degree, and a 2-year associate's degree and a job. So, we're seeing real progress in developing that. I should say, though, at the same time that we're open to that, there is, I think, a growing set of discussions, self-reflection on the issue of what we do with advanced credits at university, advanced placement, and so forth. And in fact, in some sense, you're seeing, students who very much feel that, particularly if you're worried about these issues around access, and I go back to the statistic that that we in the sort of elite end of higher education have to confront, which is that from 70 to 75% of our students come from the top income quintile. So we're working hard at access and so forth, but the fact is, for a great mass of institutions at that elite end, that's our student body. And if you put the advanced placement piece into this constitutes yet another advantage that, again, the students who are coming from different backgrounds don't get as readily. So I'm open to looking at these models. The only thing I think is really important to bear in mind, though, is to ensure that there's a level playing field, that we're finding ways for our kids from more less traditional backgrounds who find their ways to higher education to be able to participate in those acceleration programs, so that, again, we're seeing that this is, as I said before, a level playing field.
So,
my question...
do you mind introducing yourself? I'm sorry.
Sure. Ray Jacobson from Davidson College. My question's a little bit related and relates to sort of this binary income where a lot of top universities and colleges, very high sticker prices, people with incomes below a certain amount go free or almost free, and then people very wealthy who can afford it pay, and there's this whole income gap where a lot of people can't afford these schools, and what the implication is for just rising education costs and the societal implications of you know, a whole segment of the population missing out on the opportunity to afford these schools.
Any thoughts?
Want me to take a run?
Sure.
So that is our key challenge. I mean, this is the idea. The idea of these institutions is very much built on a norm of equal opportunity. We say that we want the very best students, irrespective of their financial wherewithal. And yet, again, we know that there's a skew towards high income participation. And, you know, over the last several years, I think, you know, going back almost as long as I've been in the United States, which has been about 12 years, there's been a real effort to augment ways in which we're providing financial aid, reducing the sticker price, and going into a higher income strata in terms of the availability of those funds. So I think that's very much top of mind. But having said that, we still know, this is from the work of Carolyn Hawksby and others, we know that students from low income backgrounds, despite all that you say about the cost of higher education and that you can come for free, you can come for full ride, they don't apply in the numbers they should. And so we know that the message is not getting out there, and this continues to be something that we're spending a great deal of time on. There's an initiative that has recently been announced that Hopkins, among a number of other major universities, is part of, called the American Talent Initiative. It's associated with Bloomberg Philanthropies and others. But basically, the idea is that we're all pledging to find ways in which we can significantly increase the percentage of Pell-eligible students in our populations. Pell-eligible is basically the lowest three income quintiles, to get those kids into college, and setting very specific targets for individual institutions and then across the collectivity. And a big part of that is, of course, increasing financial aid, but doing more in terms of innovative ways of reaching out to those students.
I was even asking about families between 100 and 200,000 in income, where it's just out of reach.
They're in there, just, you know, but that financial aid is available. You know, for us, we will give financial aid to families at from about $130,000, $140,000 in household income and down. And so we've recognized that you've got to go high into that group.
Nikhil, I know you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I think we're beginning to see some of that gap being bridged, at least in the master's and professional degree programs. Coursera and the University of Illinois last year launched a master's in computer science degree program. It's one of the top computer science programs in the country. The same faculty teaching the same content online. The on-campus program is priced at about $80,000. The same program on Coursera is priced at $20,000. And now it's suddenly being brought into the reach of people who wouldn't otherwise have to. We haven't seen that disruption yet on the undergraduate programs, which I think what you're talking about, where we really need to push this and go. But I think as we see top quality programs beginning to use technology to start offering graduate programs, we'll certainly see a price disruption there and make those degrees more affordable. Hopefully we'll begin to extend that into the undergraduate world as well.
Were there any more questions? Please.
Thanks. I think you guys are doing an excellent job providing.
Do you mind introducing yourself?
I'm sorry. Caleb Savian from W3 Family Office. You guys are doing an amazing job providing kind of a perspective on where education is today in the current internet age. But I'm kind of curious, if you look back 10 years ago to where we are today, it's been a pretty amazing transformation. Like, many of the companies didn't really even exist 10 years ago. Now, put your futurist hat on. Kids who are 8 years old, and look 10 years down the road, when they get to be college age, or what are their options going to be? How is the world going to look different? I mean, certainly the internet is accelerating at the pace of change right now, even more probably than it was in the last 10 years. You could argue it's going to even be more. So what are the options going to be 10 years from now?
So my view is go back to that segmentation chart. There will be opportunities for folks, for sure, to go to great universities and colleges that will continue to exist. So John Hopkins is going to be here. And there will be more offerings that are personalized. So personalized learning is becoming a big sort of trend, if you will, both in K-12 and ultimately I think it will also be for higher ed, where there will be a better linkage between the outcome of employment and the education that you're receiving. Much like in the British system, where early on you sort of have to figure out where you're headed, and then you pursue that degree, basically. So I think that what we will also see is those colleges and universities that, as I said, don't have much in the way of endowment and are relatively small, they're gone. And so the internet will for sure replace that. What is important is, most employers will say that the big issue for them is soft skills, not necessarily the hard skills. You can teach the hard skills, but the soft skills. And so the ability to understand how to assimilate, the ability to understand how to communicate, are all things that employers find to be pretty important. And if you're not able to have a situation in your educational life where those kinds of things are taught, well, you're going to be behind. So I think you'll see reasonable disruption, but if, as the secretary said, if your son or daughter gets into Stanford, you ought to take that opportunity.
Supposing, can I ask a question?
Sure.
You said go to college because of the employment numbers. Supposing you have twins and they go to, not to Stanford, but Southern Illinois, and one majors dumbly, as I did, in medieval philosophy. And so I either drive a cab or do panels the rest of my life. And the other does graphic design. Does it make any difference?
So there's in our business, consulting, you would think that the degrees that make the most sense would be economics and business. McKinsey did a really interesting piece of work. The two things that made consultants successful were either in the creative arts or biotechnology. Only correlation. Everything else didn't correlate at all in terms of success within the firm. So, I think the ability to have a broad education fundamentally is a good thing. And yes, I think we will get better and better at being able to identify opportunities where we can link outcomes to employment. But fundamentally, if you're not able to think broadly, you will not be at the top.
Greg, I know you had a thought.
I think it's, I'm just going to go out on a limb here. I think it's going to be massively different in 10 years. I think it's going to be delivered different. It's going to have to be, the cost structure of the entire system is probably going to change because it won't be supported otherwise. It has to be more engaging because people won't accept the outcomes no matter what your tax basis is. And just think about the way you did a Google search 10 years ago versus today, or hailed a cab the way you do today, or anything you do on your phone with your apps 10 years ago versus the way you do today. We will transfer knowledge and skill development differently 10 years from now, massively than we do today. That's my prediction.
I'm getting the high sign that we have to end. If you could help me thank the panelists and thank you all for participating as well. Really appreciate it.